Welcome to Section 2, 3D Modeling Basics. We're going to be talking about the basics of walls, the major building component of your 3D model. So to start off, we're going to be talking about the drawing tools and the ways that you can draw walls within your modeling space. And then we're going to be getting into the wall properties and the different things that we can do to control the wall, the individual walls per se. And then wall type properties. What are the differences between type properties and just wall properties? Because there is a big difference between those. And getting those wrong can cause you a lot of headaches down the road. So as we move into Revit, I've got a project created here with the architectural template. If I come up here and hit my wall tool, I'm just going to click on that tool. You'll see that we have a basic wall exterior brick on metal stud as the default selected. Yours might be the generic 8-inch, depending on what you've selected last. Sometimes it can change up what you're using here. So the basic wall exterior brick on metal stud is what we have. And then you'll see at the top, all of a sudden we have this Modify Place Wall tab. So the Modify tab has changed and given us some extra tools here, which are tools that we can use to draw a wall. We also have some information in this new green taskbar here. It shows the height. We can see the depth of it. We can set a constraint here, which we can also set here, a base and top constraint, which we'll get into in a second. We can also set the wall's location, line, center line, whether it's chained, an offset, a radius, all of that sort of stuff. It's kind of located right here. So up here with our drawing tools, we can draw just a single click one point, click another point, draws a wall in between those 2 points. We can draw 2 points to create a rectangle, polygons, arcs, all of that sort of stuff. So right now I'm just going to stick with the basic. So I'll click, drag, and click again. You can see as I drag, it's going to tell me what the distance is on the wall that I'm creating. So I'm going to click that again. We'll say that's a 35-foot wall there. Now I drew, as you can see, an exterior brick on metal stud wall like we talked about earlier. If I want to be able to see those layers, right now all I have is basically a rectangle on the page. It's not really showing me a lot of detail to what's going on there. If I come down here under this detail level, I have coarse selected. If I select medium or fine, I'm going to get more detail as I go down. So if I hit medium, I get a little bit, and I believe fine and medium in this case are going to be the same thing. So yours may look something like this with a nice thick line around it. TL is the hotkey for thin line. That is also located up here. As you can see, the exterior line weight of walls is a little bit thicker. If we want to be able to see a little bit more detail to this, like right now, I'm not seeing the drywall on the inside of this metal stud layer here. I can hit TL and then it cleans that up a little bit and gives me a little more information that I can see a little bit better. So getting into this wall, if I select that wall, our properties window, like we talked about before, is telling us all of the information about the thing that we have selected. So we've got this wall selected, kind of go through and see what all we have as options here. So the wall center line is basically what's controlling here, or what is the lock point of that wall. So that is just the center line between the exterior face and the interior face. We can also get into the core center line, the core faces, and then the finish faces. We'll look a little bit more at what the core faces are in the next video when we talk about how we get into the layers and the structure of the actual wall. But this location line can be very important because if we go to modify this wall, it's going to adapt based on this wall center line. So let's pull this in a little bit. And then I'm going to draw another wall exactly in line with that one. And actually, let's flip that so that they're both perfectly in line. I'm going to change this wall center line to be finish face exterior. This one is going to remain wall center line. So right now, basically what's controlling here on this one is the center line. What's controlling here is the exterior, finish face exterior. So you'll notice as I select each one, these grab or hinge points here change. So this is on the center line. If I grab this one, it's down at the bottom corner. So how you draw these can be a little bit different. So if I wanted to draw a space based entirely on the interior dimensions, maybe when I select wall, I'll change that wall center line up here to finish face interior. So then when I'm drawing, the dimension that I have going there, that 7'10", 8 foot, is going to be the interior dimensions. So right now I have 8 foot. If I click and drag down, to say another 6 foot. Now I know that this space is going to end up being exactly 8 foot by 6 foot because I drew it based on that interior control point. So that's one way that this location line can really help you. The other way that it can help you is if we all of a sudden change the exterior cladding material. Let's say I change this rather than finish face exterior, we're going to change it to interior. If I were to change the exterior cladding here, what would happen is, let's say I go from a brick to a siding or something like that, where the thickness of this exterior is going to change. Now, if this thickness exterior changes, because this has to remain the center point, what's going to happen is it's going to shrink. Let's say this shrinks by 2 inches, just as a rough kind of measurement there. If this shrinks by 2 inches and and the entire wall is shrinking by 2-inch overall thickness, we're going to shrink an inch here and we're going to shrink an inch here to keep that location center line on the center of the thickness of the wall. With this one, the finished face interior being the location line, if I change this by 2 inches, it's going to hold that point and it's just going to shrink this by 2 inches and bring this in. So if you keep your finished face interior as your control point and then go around changing the exterior cladding thickness, your interior spaces are going to remain the exact same, which can be very important on how your model reacts, especially when you're changing whole building cladding or something like that. You really want to be careful with that location line because you could change a whole lot of interior spaces that might be controlled by very tight tolerances a whole lot if all of a sudden your location line is the center line. So that's just something to be aware of. If I go to an elevation here, we'll see that I have a 10 foot. I'm going to bring this in a little bit closer to these walls so we can see here. So right now, if I select one of these walls, you'll see I have a base constraint of level 1. I drew them on level 1, so the base constraint is always going to be the level that I drew it on. So right now, the base of the wall is stuck at level 1. If I want that to be a little bit off of level 1, one way or the other, I can punch that into base offset. So I could hit 1 foot. It's going to move it up a foot from there and put that back. The top constraint right now is unconnected. So it's basically telling me that it's just kind of floating out in space up here with an unconnected height of 20 feet. So when I move this up a foot, you notice the entire wall shifted up because it's just wanting that wall to be 20 feet regardless of where the base is. If I change this to level 2, now it's going to constrain the top to level 2, the bottom to level 1. So now if I change that base 1 foot up, it keeps that top at level 2 and then just shifts the bottom up. So it changes the height of the wall, you'll see here, to 9 foot rather than 10 foot. So same thing with the top offset. I can offset that top a foot up or down if I want to. The other nice part about having a top constraint, if you all of a sudden change level 2, let's say all of a sudden level 2 instead of 10 foot becomes 12 foot, now all of the walls constrained to level 2 will shift with it. So rather than having something floating out in space, it's always kind of nice to have something constrained to a level that you've created there. So we'll throw that back to 10 foot. So getting beyond the top constraints and offsets, we can see a couple other things. We can see room bounding. So that just tells you if you're going to be using rooms, which you can tag rooms and determine square footages and things like that. Is that room going to bound a space? So if you have a wall that's maybe a partial height wall or something like that, and you don't really want it to separate two spaces, it's just more of a visual kind of barrier, you can check that off and it won't impact the room boundaries. You can also check whether or not a wall is structural. So is that a structural or bearing wall? That can be important if you're working with other people or just to remind yourself, hey, this is a bearing point. And if that box is checked, maybe you want to think twice about moving that wall around a little bit. It also gives you some dimensions of that wall. So the length of 13.5. It'll also tell you the surface area of that wall. So 134.17 square feet. That might be beneficial for doing material takeoffs or something like that. You can see the volume of that wall. I'm not sure exactly how beneficial that would be, but if you're doing, say, a concrete wall or a poured concrete wall, you could see how much volume of concrete that wall is going to encompass. And then identity data. So maybe you have a special wall type or some sort of special cladding. If that's the case, you can upload an image of that. You can also, this is just a text field for you to enter comments. All of these are items that are schedulable. So they will pop up in schedules later on when you're creating a construction document set. So this is just type in whatever comment you want about that particular wall type, and that'll show up. The mark, so this is the mark for this particular wall, not for this wall type. If you recall when we were talking about properties, I mentioned this is kind of the window that tells you everything about what you have selected. So the properties window tells you everything about the thing that you have selected for that particular one. So if I change the base constraint and the top constraint for this wall, it's going to change just this wall. It's not going to change this one too, which is also a brick on material stud option. If you hit edit type, it opens this other properties window, this type properties. So this properties window over here to the left is telling us everything about this specific wall. The type properties window is telling us everything about every exterior brick on metal stud wall. So this is going to tell us everything about this wall as well as this wall. Anything we change in the type properties window is going to change for both of these wall types. So that is an important distinction to be conscious of, because if all of a sudden you come in here and you start changing all these type properties and you're trying to make this wall fit into a certain space or adapt to a certain thing, you're also all of a sudden changing every other wall in the project that is an exterior brick on metal stud, and that can cause you a lot of headache and problems later on down the road. So when I say that this mark is for this specific wall, that is not for brick on metal stud, that is for this wall instance in particular. If you want a type mark, which would be every wall that is brick on metal stud, that can be found here. So there is a type mark here. There's also a bunch of identity data. Like I mentioned here with the identity data for this specific wall, there is identity data for this type of wall. So the image, a keynote, a model number, a manufacturer, certain comments, if there's a website for that particular wall type or product, any description you have, fire rating, and if you have a cost associated with that wall, you can throw that in there. There's also analytical properties that you can get into for analytical models. We won't touch too much on those, but those are based mostly on the materials that make up a wall. There's also a couple options here for construction. We will get into those in the next video when we talk about the structure and creating different and custom wall types. We'll get into the structure and the wrapping and the function and stuff. There's also the graphics tab here. This will allow you to override this particular look, whatever this is going to essentially look like in coarse. So we mentioned at the beginning this fine, medium, and coarse. What do you want it to look like in coarse? Because for the most part, you're not going to see all this detail. If I throw this back on coarse, it's just kind of a blob. If that's the case and you want this to be, say, pochade and have a solid fill, maybe we come in here and say, okay, we're going to say that's a solid fill pattern. And I don't want my walls black. I want them to be like a dark gray. So now if I hit OK, now those walls kind of pop a little bit more on the page, and anything else I happen to have, the walls kind of stand off from those a little bit. So that's a real brief run through of kind of walls and how to draw them, and then the properties and type properties that are associated with them. So as you get into walls, they are the biggest building block of Revit. So it's important to kind of get those down and really hone in on the different properties and ways that you can use them. Because if you use them incorrectly, you will have a very hard time later on when you're trying to adapt and adjust your model. Going back and making edits can be a huge pain if you haven't set up things like your location line and your structure and your core and all of that sort of stuff correctly. But we'll get into the core and things in the next video.